So let me begin with a very broad question and a very obvious kind of question, which is, what is a regular week as of Outlook magazine mean? I mean, I didn't ask a regular day because I know that, maybe one day you get home very early, but other days you don't get home at all, right?
So regular week is very hectic because we are a thematic magazine. I don't know how many people here read Outlook, but we are not a weekly or a monthly or a fortnightly. We have become a decazine, which means we come out every 10 days. And so we did it to saying that everybody has really compete. There are too many stories, and so it becomes even more difficult for us because we have become a thematic magazine. So we only take like one issue, and we try to do a 360-degree thing as much back in a magazine. I was a journalist. I used to read stories, but I used to not get the entire perspective. Like, let's say if you have caste census, right? So you would have a cover story, let's say, of 20 pages, but you would still not be able to understand the entire issue as a reader. So we try and take a lot of columns for, against, everything, and we try and take, which makes my week very difficult, we try and take unheard voices. So let's say we don't go for usual columnists. They also do columns for us sometimes, but we also try and get a lot of people who have field experience or some kind of ground experience and ask them to write. And most of our columns also come from a lot of regional kind of languages, and then we get them translated. So then it becomes very difficult. So I sometimes, and Maya Bhushan is here and he works with us, and he'll tell you sometimes it stretches till 7 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m., 3 a.m. is very regular. And then you have to wake up for a 9 a.m. meeting to discuss what's happening and what we can kind of. So yeah, that is the.
You mentioned something in passing right now, which is that you try to connect to people who are on the ground. I mean, and that really suggests to me that for someone who goes from the field and becomes an editor will do the job differently from someone who has been on a desk for a while, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious. I came across something that you said in an interview, which I found maybe you would like to just expand a bit on that. As a magazine, our job is to bring into focus conversations that people do not really want to have.
Yeah, which is.
So that's one. But I think what you're also saying is that you want to bring in people who need to be part of that conversation, right? I mean, because, the other India is not English speaking, does not write in English, cannot relate to, what the city people do. The vernacular India, so to say. But would you like to expand on this part? Because, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but still what you're trying to do with Outlook in this respect.
So I'll give it, I'll start with examples. So for instance, which will be easier for people to understand. So for instance, because I was a reporter, we would go out on the field and you meet a lot of people. Like I met Jacinta Kerketa, or I'll go to Jharkhand, and I went to Jharkhand recently. I still report, so I'm not really desk. We saw this flag which had red stripes on it, and I didn't know. And then I asked around, and it turned out to be the Sarna flag. I mean, I don't. So I don't know how many people here know about the Sarna religion. So the president, Draupadi Murmu, is Sarna. That's the indigenous religion. And Jharkhand government passed a code, Sarna code, which where they wanted the Sarna religion to be included in the religion list, right? Otherwise, you have this others written over there. So we brought out an entire issue looking at the Sarna code, how the Jharkhand government was trying to do something like this and how they passed this resolution, which is still stuck at the central level. But that's how we get the ground voices, and then we went all over in Jharkhand looking at people who were involved in the struggle, right? Not really people in Delhi, Bombay, and preaching from the pulpit, but people who were actually doing this activism. And one of the stories we did, and we were really trolled for it, was the story of a woman, a poet, first generation poet from the Asur community. And I don't know how many people know about the Asur community, but they worship Mahisasur. But because they are not Hindus, they consider Mahisasur as their ancestor. So it's not really. And then in 2016, I think there was Smriti Irani made some comments about this worship of Mahisasur. So they don't worship him, but they mourn his death during Dashera. Which was very misunderstood by the media, and we went to her village, which was very remote in Sakwa Pani in Jharkhand, and we did an interview with her, and she's also a poet. And when we put out that story, you know, people on Twitter started saying things like she looks like a bhais, and you know, all kinds of stuff, which kind of also brought out to the front was what people, and Asur community obviously, because they're also in that list of communities that are getting extinct. So very few people are left who speak the language Asuri and Mandari. I mean, I don't know if you must be aware of this. So that was one story. And recently we did, coming back to the difficult stories, we did this Kashmir issue, which was called Silence. It was a very abstract idea because for a few years, we used to receive pitches from freelancers and people in Kashmir, but there was nothing about the politics in Kashmir. It was all about this craft and, you know, embroidery and all this. And I thought there was something strange going on because the abrogation happened in 2019, and after that, there was this complete silence coming from the valley. But it was a very difficult story for us to do because nobody was willing to talk. And how do you then translate silence into text? Because we remain a text magazine. So we got this poet, which was another unheard voice. His name is Madhosh Balhami, and his house was burnt by the paramilitary forces because 3 militants had taken shelter in 2018. And I think 3,000 pages of his poetry got burnt, and he could never salvage it because, you know, when this kind of encounter happens, the police tells you to leave your house right away. The next morning he woke up and he saw the house that was all burnt, and he wrote a couplet in charcoal, which loosely translates as, you know, it loosely translated it that sab kuch nashwar, something of that sort, that everything is gone, but then everything remains. And then he took again to writing poems, and he was one of those guys who's a poor farmer, like, you know, he is a daily wage laborer, used to be. And somehow he started writing slogans and things like that, and then he used to read poems at the graves of what they called then the militants, you know. So he said that I was haunted by them because they were such young boys. But the story is never like black and white. It's always like in shades of gray. So we got for that Kashmir issue, it came out on June 1st, right before the election results were announced, talking about this imposed silence. And there were a lot of these people who were, like a musician was talking, wrote a column for us. Madhosh Balhami was there. There were a lot of these kinds of people who have experienced this silence. Not really people who were like from the government or, you know, from the other side, because those really are all out there. We hardly get to hear from people who are experiencing or, like, you know, this suffering, this sort of thing. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but yeah, that is.
You know, just listening to you, and I thought, how will Chinki respond if I said, are you trying to turn Outlook into a subaltern magazine?
Who said this guy, this Spivak, who came under a lot of controversy? Subaltern must speak.
That's okay. But let's go a little bit back to the beginning. Why journalism? And I sort of hinted that I would ask you that. Why journalism? Why not something else? Or is it something that you got into half by accident, half by intent?
It was accidental for sure. When I was growing up, I grew up in Patna. And back then, you know, my grandfather lived in a small town called Ara. And Ara had this huge, like, long-lasting, eternal power cuts.
बहुत बदनाम जगह है।
बहुत ज़्यादा, अभी भी है। तो आरा में ना उस वक्त मेरे नाना जो थे वो बहुत, he used to have this huge collection of books and mostly Russian. The strange connection which I was talking to Madhvi about today, that Patna had this huge Russian literature. Somehow You know, this Maxim Gorky's mother is still there in all shop windows. In fact, they're so fast that they translated Olga Tokarczuk, like fast, you know, and these are like local.
Wasn't People's Publishing
Yes,
House
Radhuka
right
and-
opposite Patna
Exactly.
College? Right.
Yes, and there used to be that thing just across the street, and now there's a juice wala over there. वो बंद हो गया. But there used to be all these Russian books, and so I grew up reading all that, and then and I wrote about it. That we didn't know where Siberia was, right? But we read things like Ivan was sleeping on the stove. But हमारे घर का stove was something different. How do you sleep on it? So you start imagining things, and so I loved reading at that point in time, and that time I think journalism was considered a profession for like real losers, that you'll always be this burden on your family, paisa nahi hoga, ye nahi hoga, wo nahi hoga, and there were all these examples in your vicinity of failed journalists. So then I didn't know what to do with my life. I tried to do MBA, I couldn't do it. I went for the civil services examinations, walked out halfway because I didn't know what they were going to ask me. I mean, I was not interested. So finally my father relented and said, okay, why don't you just do journalism? And then I did it. And I liked it actually. It was very, I studied literature. And I was telling him that I actually don't read much of non-fiction. I only read fiction and poetry. And then I went to the US and studied more. Came back and joined Express. And then after that, I loved going to the field. And then forgot to do other things on the way. Then, yeah, came here.
I mean, what you were just saying reminded me of a column that Vivek Kaul, again, a Ranchi boy, wrote in the Mint, which is that his parents, of course, wanted him to be an engineer, and he ended up being whatever. So it's like, ye nahi hua, wo nahi hua, so finally.
तो ये कर लिया.
ठीक है. It's turned out quite okay, right? I mean,
completely.
Let's talk a bit about difficult stories and or themes that you have cared about more than others. I mean, we all have. Yeah. I think somewhere in, again, one of your interviews or one of your columns, I think you wrote that even journalism is subjective.
Yeah,
right?
It is completely. I totally.
So in that sense, you would have your biases. I mean, certain stories will be favored over others. So in that sense, I mean, are there stories? I know, for example, that you did your story on, for 10 years you went to the
Kamatipura brothels,
And so are there any other stories which
many actually. If we can play the presentation, then I think the audience will have a better idea of...
We'll just get someone to move the slides along, but you'll have to remember the page number. I think it's about 50 odd pages.
Yeah, it can just keep playing. So, I just wanted to people to see the covers because we do a lot. We give a lot of emphasis on the covers of the magazine because I think the covers are really important, and the cover needs to stand out and is a standalone kind of a story. So the difficult stories. One of the most difficult ones was we did an issue 2 years ago. Actually, I'll start with Palestine. Palestine was last year, and we decided with this one simple thing that the war that we speak of is never elsewhere. And if women and children are dying and being killed, why are we distancing ourselves? Because they keep saying that the world is flat and it's one world and whatnot, and it really doesn't work like that. So we dedicated our entire anniversary issue to Palestine, which is a big deal for an organization like ours, because people said target audience nahi milega, koi kharidega nahi, magazine advertisements nahi honge. But we said no, we would like to do this, and then it was the most challenging in terms of the fact that we were not on the ground, and we had no way to go on the ground, but we started tracking people on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And a lot of people were posting these things, right? Like that the bomb fell here and my family. And some of the people we kept losing in touch with because, they just disappeared, because of the situation. But after 2.5 months of just chasing and chasing and chasing, we did get, and in fact, one of the reporters won the Ladli Media citation also for her work on the women and children stories. So we basically called it, this is another difficult one, this is 100 pages of just resistance poetry. So we got 100 pages of testimonies from Palestine, and we dedicated it to this one journalist I had met many years ago when I was in Syracuse. It was 2006, and they had some exchange program with these journalists from the Middle East. And this guy was from Palestine, and that time he didn't know much about Palestine. And he gave me this one photo frame with this Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it was these bullet marks on it. And he signed his name. All these journalists had signed his name, but he specifically said Ramallah. And then for 17 years, I've kept that thing. It hangs on every wall of every house that I've lived in. And I don't know if he's alive or, and then the intro that I wrote for that issue was in present tense because we didn't want to think that he's dead. But that was an attempt to kind of tell the story through real people. And it's 100 pages of just Palestine. That was one difficult one. The other one was, we did one issue on Ram 2 years ago. And we decided to look at Ram because it has become such a political thing in India right now. And when we were growing up in Bihar, you know, the stories that we heard about Ram were very different from this war cry, and the iconography had changed, and you know, Ram is now with this Dhanush and Tir rather than what we saw in the calendars, which was like this. You know, I don't know how many of you guys remember those old calendars, and you know, so the gods were becoming weaponized, and it was very difficult for us to understand what exactly was going on. So we decided to look at who is Ram actually, and the cover image on that issue was shot by Bharat Bala. He had done a film on the Ram Nami community in Chhattisgarh, who tattooed the name of Ram all over their bodies. Because they were Dalits and were not allowed to enter temples, so they said, "Hamare man mein hi Ram hai." And so, you know, in Bihar, for instance, Ram is not considered God. He's the Dulha image. And people in Bihar don't ask for anything from Ram because he's the Damad, right? And then there's a lot of angst. Bihar mein log abhi bhi betiyon ka naam Sita nahi rakhte, UP mein shaadi nahi karte because how Ram treated Sita, you know. So, and Sita's temple is there in Sitamarhi, so in that issue there was a story on that as well. So we looked at South India, for instance. We looked at every other place that we could possibly find to look at this character, or the mythological, I would not say historical, mythological figure of Ram and what it means in today's context. So that was a difficult issue to do because in today's day and age, agar aap Ram ka naam lene se bahut mushkil hota hai. And then Adivasi issues we have been pretty much focusing on a lot. We did the Sarna issue, and I think we put the Sarna tricolor flag on the cover, which was advised against by a lot of people that unless and until it's a tricolor, don't take it. But we did that, and we have continued to do Adivasi related, indigenous people related issues. Difficult stories, obviously the consecration of the Ram Mandir. We do get a lot of warnings and stuff. AFSPA, you know, Nagaland in 2021, they killed 13 civilians. I don't know how many of you remember that, but we went to Mon district in Nagaland and spent some time there looking at what happened over there. And the thing is, we are so far away that we don't really get to know what happened on the ground. So we encourage ground reportage, because right now there's this whole trend of doing phone journalism where you don't get to see things. So in actually Nagaland, when we went, we found that vehicle, which the government was saying was ambushed, but the vehicle was shot at from the front because the bullet screen was shattered, which means that it was not an ambush. The vehicle itself was a proof. So we took the photo of the vehicle on the cover. And so it's difficult, but we kind of manage somehow. These were some of the difficult stories that we have done, yeah. And Kashmir, of course. I mean, we just came out with an issue on Kashmir. So.
Now, this is one, again, as a woman editor of Outlook, the first in its 20-odd years. But journalism is still a boys' club, right? I mean, let me finish. You know, so in some ways, things probably started to change in the 90s, and I was talking to Ashley DeMello, who's been with the Times of India forever, and he was telling me that at one time you had Dina Vakil, Harshad Mehta, yeah. And somebody else, Bachi Karkar. And, you know, but those were rare things.
Yeah.
And then more recently you had maybe some change after Me Too or maybe not. Um, so I mean, that's a categorical no, but still, I mean, so would you say that some things have changed, maybe not? What has changed? I mean, for example, we talk a little bit, and you don't have to go in great detail. When you were appointed editor of Outlook, it did create a big storm.
A lot of bad blood with a lot
No,
of
or even closer home. I mean, one of the things I noticed was that no local newspaper has done an interview with you, right?
No, and nobody even.
That's remarkable. If it was a male editor, people would be. I would be struggling to,
Yeah.
So it's kind of that obvious, I think.
Yeah, it is very obvious. And when I became the editor, and it's not like I was looking for a job. I was actually going to study fiction writing at that point in time. And they asked me, and I refused 3 times. Then 4th time, my friend said, "Why don't you just take it up and see how it goes?" And I took it, and then I spent the next 3 months like literally crying every day. Because every day I would go to office and there would be like 5 resignation letters, and the entire team left. In fact, so much so that we were like 5 people in the magazine, and we had to still bring out the magazine, and I had to sit and design pages also, the covers and everything. So yeah, it's been very difficult in terms of the kind of stuff. News Laundry went after us, although they had no reason to. And even now, when you meet a lot of people, they are generally very patronizing, because male-dominated newsrooms have been a thing and continue to remain a thing. I'm still not part of the boys' gang, and thankfully I'm not. But yeah, even now, I mean, we had people calling me up and saying, "Aapko mardon se itni nafrat kyun hai?" And this kind of thing you would never say to a male editor, right? And all kinds of shit hit the fan at one point in time. But they were my friends who were very sweet, and they would they were just there, and a lot of all kinds of things people said, and they would say things like, "Oh, how much would you know about politics? Or what do you know about politics?" But for us, see, women look at things very differently. I mean, a lot of men would think that covering a Modi rally or covering defense or covering a beat like BJP or Congress is the thing to do. But what about education? What about health? What about the processes that actually make our lives livable or unlivable? So nobody was focusing on these things. In fact, I've worked at Indian Express, I've worked at India Today, and I've worked at many other organizations, including the BBC. The focus has always not been on processes, like these slow-moving kind of things. And most of these beats were considered unsexy beats, like health or education, which actually really matter a lot, by the way, at the end of the day. So the perspective was very different, and there was a lot of resistance when we started looking at issues from this kind of lens. Okay, so like, for example, women's issues matter a lot to us. The tribal, of course, issues matter. Religion matters a lot to us. So caste, for instance, and we look at caste very differently. It's not about covering press conferences, let's say. And so it's been very challenging. But the thing is, then we said, okay, here we are, and we are going to be here. Yeah.
3 years now?
Yeah, 3 years. 10 days remaining for 3 years, but yeah.
My God, you're really counting. I would be happy to have at least 2 more senior editors, journalists in your chair in the coming months.
No, Jyoti Malhotra became the editor of Tribune. Now, 150-year-old newspaper finally has gotten one. Then I think South Mein, the New Indian Express, has gotten. Outlook has 3 other women editors. Okay. One has just quit, but Outlook Traveler and Outlook Money are both women editors. Okay. And lot of changes are coming in, but the problem is that, see, still the part and parcel in the larger network or whatever, they're still fed by male psychology, which is very difficult to kind of either comprehend or get around. So yeah. I mean, you're right. I would love to see more women. Yeah.
Sorry, we'll get to you, but my turn first, kind of thing. There are a lot of studies which show that basically we are drawn to negative news, right? And they make better headlines. You get more clicks in this digital age that we are in. So, in that sense, I wouldn't say with the government, when people say in general that, why do we always have to focus on what's wrong rather than what's right? But for newspapers, for magazines, what also matters is selling X number of clicks. So, do you think that would be a reason why magazines, and not necessarily in Outlook or India Today or Indian Express, or that negative news gets more?
No, I think there was a time when people believed all this, and then suddenly there was this happy news industry that cropped up, where a lot of people still on Instagram and other social media want to do this good news for people's mental health or whatever. But no, I think for us, and I'd be very honest, we've never had. In fact, we function out of a separate building altogether. We are not in touch with marketing or any other departments. I still don't know the revenue. We have no idea about the revenue or anything. I have never been called by the owners of the company. I have only met them once when I was being hired, that too on a Zoom call. And our CEO has been very nice to us, and in fact I've said this openly. He's never ever interfered. Once or twice he may have said that, oh, I'm warning you, this might turn into something. And then he said, but it's your call. And so we actually, it's very difficult for people to believe this, but we have no compulsion as of now to look at revenue or to consider this market or revenue or to make money. We remain like one of those old school people really in a cave, and we have released budgets. We're a very small organization, and Outlook went through a lot of bad times. At one point it didn't have 1 lakh rupee also to pay. In fact, at one point they didn't have money to buy even toilet rolls, which was during the COVID time, because a lot of this thing came up. But now they made profits last year, a little bit, but that's good news. And we have never been after good news. But negative news, see, we don't want to do how to wear a sari in 10 different ways. I mean, that's not, or what do you do for your skin regime, or let's say Alia Bhatt is, or somebody in our magazine actually recently put Janvi Kapoor's engagement live blog. Now that's something we don't want to take, and that's not, but you get a lot of eyeballs on that. There's a click and bait journalism, which is our real enemy now, and we are trying to counter it because volumes fall. And there's this whole thing with the digital and online coming in. It's an extreme pressure for a magazine which remains a print magazine. So it's very difficult to kind of figure that out. But we are trying to. And touch wood, our revenues, our subscriptions have risen over the last 3 years. They've not fallen. So I guess people do read if you have good stories, and they'll find a good story. So I guess that's what helps us. And a lot of other people, we help by friends, who write for us, and it's a beautiful world in terms of okay, if I know him, and I have no problem saying that, oh, I don't understand this, can you help me? And then he will connect me to somebody else, and that person will connect. So that way it has really helped. And a lot of my friends are here. Miriam is here, and she has given us her artworks for covers. We did a cover on Goa, and Maya Bhushan is also here in the audience, who wrote a cover story. We have been very experimental also. And I remember we were sitting at Anjuna Beach at Guru Bar, and we were discussing this climate change, whatever situation happening, and real estate and all that. And because I'm not from here, I don't understand much of it. And I said, Maya Bhushan, tum ye story kar lo. And karte, I said, ye Guru Bar to lag bhi nahi raha hai, ye Anjuna to pehle nahi tha aisa. And then Maya Bhushan said, I said, how about using a mermaid, a fictional character, and then telling the story of Goa? And I remember telling him कि we'll not tell anyone, because people will start laughing at both of us कि हम mermaid के through कैसे इतना serious story बोल सकते हैं. But we did it. I think Maya Bhushan, if you 10 pages, no? And he called the mermaid Goa. He's sitting right in the audience. So yeah, so we did a lot of this experimental stuff. And So negative news, in fact, we did a whole allegorical issue on this. When NewsClick got raided, there was a lot of fear in the newsrooms, and we were warned that don't do anything because you will be also raided. And these raids are a big fear for all newsrooms. So I was like, अगर हम कुछ नहीं बोलेंगे, then people will say that इन्होंने कुछ बोला नहीं, and then when they come for us, then nobody will be there to speak for us. So he said, okay, let's take out an allegorical issue and use fiction as a tool. So I'm saying that I don't know why journalists are so wary of using fiction or poetry. So we did one thing called All Is Well. And All Is Well, basically, we told our reporters to write fiction pieces of imagining themselves to be in happy newsrooms and how this control and dystopia works. So this entire issue is like basically all is well in the newsroom, and there's nothing happening, and this great government and this great surveillance masters are very good, and we are being fed, and we are looking at flowers all around us. The weather never changes, it's always controlled temperature. So we looked at Margaret Atwood, and we looked at I don't know how to pronounce his name, but there's this Russian writer who wrote this dystopian novel way back in 1964, if I remember correctly, called V. And there was Maya Bhushan's piece in it, who's writing this online thing called Goa 2075. So looking at all kinds of contours. So so we've been pretty experimental. We don't really look at this formula-based approaches.
This idea that fiction may be a better way of looking at India today. I mean, I have heard it over the last 12 months. At least two other people who write non-fiction say that अब अगली किताब जो है ना fiction लिखना पड़ेगा.
Allows you greater freedom. Fiction, non-fiction लिए जेल कौन जाएगा अभी?
ये भी है, वो भी है. But the other thing, fiction, non-fiction, I think Pratap Mehta, who is equally liked and disliked.
Yeah.
I think in one of his columns many years ago said that, there's no way that political scientists, social scientists can explain India. Forget it. It's only through fiction that you can, and of course I think may have referred to Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude and maybe some other writings, but, there's some truth there that, which kind of political science theory, at least, I mean, I've studied political science, I cannot really make sense of India at all. And, you look at stuff, which people write for the Express, whether it's in the form of, what's happening in Haryana or wherever, but, using political science theories, and kisko pata hai, Hindustan itna ajeeb hai. I mean, you had that story on the dawn of Ara and Mokama.
Mokama,
That reminded me of one of our scholars in residence, Amrita Shah, who had done a story of Hazi Mastan way back in the 80s, with the Illustrated Weekly. But the Dawn of Mokama story was...
He was given a parole recently, and it was a crazy story because, I went to Patna and I didn't know this guy. All these posters with this guy in a hat. And I'm like, driver को कि ये कौन आदमी है? He's like, आप इनको नहीं जानते, ये बहुत बड़े डॉन है. ऐसे डॉन है मतलब तो ये political party. उस समय he was with the JDU, he was fighting, and he said नीतीश कुमार भी इनके पैर पड़ते हैं because ये उनको ये और राजा भैया from that प्रतापगढ़ यूपी. And राजा भैया के बारे में how these urban legends are ना कि वो उसके पास crocodiles और sharks है, and when he does this local justice situation वो पानी में डाल देगा आपकी body और फिर postmortem वो कुछ भी नहीं होता वो shark खा जाते हैं. So similarly they had all these stories about this guy Anant Singh.
I think originally James Bond वाले किसी मूवी में था that yeah.
And this guy, so I said, I want to meet this guy, and everybody is like, अरे उसने तो पिछले बार एक जर्नलिस्ट को मिला था, उसको उल्टा टांग दिया था, and उसको रूम में बंद कर दिया था, and he had 500 cases on him, including keeping a python in his house, and these animal rights activists went mad, and he kept like hathi in his house, horses, and all kinds of animals. So we went to meet him, and he used to go to Vidhan Sabha not in a car but in a horse carriage. In fact, there was a rumor that he had kidnapped Udit Narayan to sing a song for him called Hum Hai Raja Bhaiya, sorry, Hum Hai Chote Sarkar, and there was this whole, and there was a video of him, okay. So he agreed to give this interview, and then this one other journalist said that you keep your phone on, okay, so if there's anything you run because this guy is whatever. And so I went, and then he was wearing this hat, and even when he had to smoke a cigarette, somebody would come, put a cigarette in between his lips, and then somebody would come and light the cigarette, and it was that kind of stuff. So now we have to get the story out. So we behaved like that we were really dumb and we didn't understand. So I said, अरे आपके बारे में सुना है, आपके पास AK-47 है और आप वो and there was this one case where he had Notch girls in Mokama dance, and he was firing this AK-47, वो हवाई firing कहते हैं जिसको बिहार में. So he said, अरे मैडम को दिखाओ AK-47. So there was this huge parat, and I still have photos of it. 3 AK-47s were like in front of us. So we are also touching it. अरे बड़ा अच्छा gun है, what do you say? Then we asked at some point, there was a gang war, and I said, आपको, so he said, they were shooting me and I got this bullet here, and I continued to smoke my cigarette and then finished it and walked to the hospital. So I said, आपको डर नहीं लगा? So he said, आपको यहाँ बैठ के डर लग रहा है क्या? Then I said, time to leave. But he used to wear this skin, this sher ka skin or something. He's a crazy character. I mean, he's still politically quite relevant now. But he's, I keep switching parties like JDU, RJD, sometimes, whatever, yeah.
Okay. Couple of audience questions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll all be bored to death. So maybe 2, 3, and then it'll come back to me.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear myself, so yes. Hi, Chinki. Thanks very much, Pushkar sir, for organizing this. I don't know if this is a simulation that we live in or not, but India, if it changes to become sterile and westernized or whatever standard you want to put it up against, will not be India. If it changes in the way that you imagine it to be. So India is an enigma in my head. Chinki, thank you very much for sharing your story. So I come from a journalism background myself. My dada used to be a journalist with Tribune, Milap and Pratap.
Oh.
Pre-partition.
Yeah.
Post-partition, life changed. And that's why I was discouraged to become a journalist. पैसा नहीं है.
पैसा अभी भी नहीं है. मतलब print में अगर ईमानदार journalist है तो पैसे नहीं है.
Absolutely. and that's spot on, and that's exactly it's a nice segue into the question that I have, not so much to you, but something that I can leave everyone to think about. Literacy has taken a massive hit.
Yeah.
A massive hit. I lecture at universities and colleges quite commonly, and I'm finding that not simple, but medium level vocabulary simply doesn't translate to the kids at all. And I'm talking kids 20, 21, 20.
That's called Gen Z.
Say again, Gen Z, sure. That's the vocabulary we have to adopt now.
Yeah.
So, click and bait journalism came up as you were talking. And that's really weighing on my mind because I'm dealing with a generation that has lost the attention span that you're in, or generally speaking, I guess, at an average 98% of the audience have a massive attention span to get through a book or portions of a book. But now we're looking at a very interesting situation happening across the world, not just India. And the work that you're doing is, in a way, not just experiment. I think it's pivotal because you're mixing fiction with real life stories. How do we create audience for real life stories, let alone a fictitious real life story experimentation stuff? Because I would love to write for you at some point. But I'm thinking to myself, who am I speaking to? Because this is a click and bait journalism environment that has not only been created, but fostered by forces behind which of.
Yeah. So the way we are doing it is that we are trying to do away with this click and bait stuff. So for instance, we realized that if you do, like we did a scan of all the popular stories on Outlook. Now the Outlook stories will look at the popular stuff, we will want to die as a journalist. Then we said, okay, what if we remove this and keep this instead? Then what will happen? It's taken us 3 years to get to that. But I think what news organizations need to do is to stop creating pressure on each other with this click and bait and come together to kind of, discard this kind of stuff. Because people do read. I mean, from our experience, because the subscriptions have increased for the magazine, and I'm talking physical copies. Even though we did decide to do away with the weekly format because there's a huge problem in the vendor distribution, all kinds of things. And we started to get a lot of these people who were reading stories online, data. So we looked at the data, And then we realized, okay, we also may have to change. We cannot be these dinosaurs, sitting, but we have to do it ethically and we have to do it mindfully. So we thought, okay, let's start looking at videos and how we can use videos to tell a story. So let's say if we send somebody to Jharkhand, let's say, we try and make a very basic video at least, or Kashmir, we'll try and do a basic video so that it can draw in the audience because of this attention span. And now if we make that video really interesting and like a teaser, so we are using videos as a teaser or carousels or what they're called, like these small reels. It's very tough, by the way. I mean, most of the time we are also failing to get them to read the full online story. And similarly, what we do in the magazine is that, let's say we get a lot of stuff. We'll get like one page and we'll see for rest go online. So you see, we are creating a to and fro and we're synchronizing both online and our magazine together because we don't want to lose our magazine thing. We remain a magazine in print and in form. And when we do interviews, by the way, now, and we have a lot of Gen Z, we ask them, what poetry do you read? Do you read fiction? Do you not read fiction? And the rest is, no, I know, I mean, you probably have become a little hopeless, but no, I have hope, people do read. You just have to wait for a long time. So then you will have to probably like do what we think, like I think a lot of people used to think poorly of this approach, but you have to write very simply, which is a very tough thing to do. Like, people use this postmodern, whatever, this kind of jargon a lot. I think, who are we proving our English to any which way? So let's write simply, which is very difficult, and use shorter sentences. And this focus in Indian journalism, for instance, is not on writing very well. So for example, metaphors, you have to use the lead, what's called, what we call LEDE, which is the intro. So the problem is also with how we are looking at a story. Who, what, when, why doesn't work anymore like that, in that order at least, which was taught to us in traditional journalism as to how to write a news report. But you have to break those structures to make the story, like, see, if I read a story and I'm not interested, I will also leave the story in the second paragraph. No? So it's challenging both ways. The problem is that very, very few writers exist. And so we give them exercises to do in terms of fiction, in terms of, and sometimes we make them rewrite a story like 12 times, let's say, 13 times, they'll complain, but might as well try.
Could you please speak into the mic because it's a recording as well, so.
Sorry about that. I was just checking if you have a lot of Gen Z writers.
Well, Gen Z, so see, if you can look at it very depressing situation types, or you can like have fun with it. So when we did this Alice Munro issue, I don't know how many were aware of this sexual harassment allegations raised by her daughter. Alice Munro is this Canadian writer, and I was a big fan and whatnot, and then this whole thing came. Now there's this huge dilemma in the art world and the literature world and any other world about whether art is free of the artist. And if you look at Picasso, for instance, right? I mean, now we live in a biographical age. Pehle humko pata nahi hota tha, to humko nahi. Now when we know, how do you take a call, right? So there's this Gen Z department which is in the social media team. Now this is not commentary on Gen Z, but I'm just saying that they came out and they wrote things like Alice Munro only was sexually abused. Now this is blasphemy in a newsroom because you haven't read the issue. It's written directly, right? It's written like bold on the cover itself that Alice Munro's daughter, when she was 9-year-old, had raised. But what do you do with that? So like it was funny, and they said, नहीं, अगर उसका बेटी को abuse किया होगा तो Alice को भी abuse किया होगा. I said, this is great. Now they have assumed the role of the court also.
Sorry, are we talking still about a Gen Z in your?
Yeah, so they don't read. Like for instance, we were doing an issue on Nehru, and I said, make a cover, something like Banco's Ghost. Now Banco's Ghost is very common for us. We know Banco and we know Macbeth. This guy is looking at me, he's like, Banco kaun hai? I said, Macbeth suna hai? He's like, no. Then also I realized, okay, maybe, but then I can't expect them to know.
And did you see where I'm going with this? So it's almost like the baton is not being passed on to a very well-read generation.
Well, I don't know. Maybe my grandfather must have thought that about me also. So, but we did it in our own way. Anyways, I'll be dead and gone. Abhi wait, wo dekh lega after.
My name is Dilip Sahakari.
Yeah.
I am surprised to see you in the position of editor. I was,
Shocked or surprised?
yeah, I was expecting some grey-haired lady, etc.
I just dyed it.
Because most of the editors in Goa are 60 plus, 65 plus. So it's a really correlation on bottom of my heart. Okay.
Thank you.
So one question I was having in my mind is how do you start your day and how you take care of your family? Because my wife is a MD doctor, but she never allows me to come in the kitchen. If at all I go, she said, you making mess of it, you better keep and read your newspaper. And she gets up early morning at 5 o'clock, 5:30, finish cooking and goes. And I am always eating like a king, which I don't like, but I am forced. So how do you do? Secondly, like say Murmu, our honorable president, whether she was also doing chapati in the morning or not, I am having this in my mind. Or yes, Mule, Sumitra Mule, NCP, how the ladies are doing that. And the third thing is, are you not scared? Because when male and female are going for taking, let us say, some risky shots or something, male has been given upper hand by nature. By nature.
I don't think so. That's true at all.
Because,
what upper hand?
Because I never heard any male raped anywhere in the world. Females are only raped.
But men commit rape, no? So the onus is on men, not on women. I think that's a wrong way to kind of talk about this. And why should drop? I don't know about drop the Murmu's kitchen routine, but I am single, so I don't have all of those worries. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rahul Chandavarkar. I had a question. In your express days, you did extensive rural reporting in the field of education. So, can you share some key findings back then, 2008 or something? But and what is the situation now? Has there been an improvement?
Well, rural reporting in terms of education, I think that was 2009 when the Right to Education Act was passed. And then we looked at the poor performing districts at that point in time, and we went to one of the worst enrollment situation, which was a village which was nearby. The key findings were things like, how do you make this policy decision? Because what we found on the ground, and this was expressed, I think, Sunday big picture. And we figured that, see, these people are poor, right? Like, let's say you make mandatory the school going and you make all these things free. But the parents are going to the farm. There are like some 7 kids in the house, or let's say even 3 kids in the house. The daughter has to take care of the kids. Now, the easier way to have done it would have been to do an evening school, let's say, because the parents would have returned by then this girl doesn't have to take care of the kids, cook, or, the reality in rural India, or let's say poorer India, is very different than what the policy makers were kind of doing this blanket rule situation. So I think that was one of the key findings, which also kind of led us to other stories, like for instance the transgender bill. Now transgender bill, this whole thing of familial relationship, like let's say the law considers only blood relation, but unke wahan pe guru and shishya system hai, the guru chela system, right? So so these policy makers never consulted any of these people, right? So that was one key finding there, and that became one of our guiding principles in all our reporting, is to understand the gap. Actually see who's consulting who, and what is the lived reality of people in rural India, for instance. Like for instance, we just came out with a rape issue, and what we did was to remember the rapes that happened in the last 15 or 20 years, the famous ones. Like for example, we took I don't know how many of you remember the Badaयूं rape case of 2014, where they hung 2 minor girls from the branches of a tree. We sent our photographer and reporter there, and we took the mango tree on the cover as a reminder. Because the basic thing, I think what journalists have forgotten also is, how do you remember and how do you tell a story, right? The story of rape, for instance. Like Aruna's story, how many of us remember the KEM hospital thing where she was in a vegetative state for 25 years, right? Raped by a ward boy. So things like that. So rural India is very different, urban India is different, and these were the key findings. The key finding is also one of the things is that you have to hit the ground. If you are writing a story on rural India, you can't do, and which a lot of news organizations, because of budgets and whatnot, they are saying that do it over the phone or don't go. Like, you know, because, but I think if you don't go, how do you see things? And the reality is very different from, like I was totally against private education and healthcare completely. But when I went to do a story on public-private partnership in education at the time, like many years ago, I think it was 2011 and all that, I thought there was a visible, I mean, I saw there was a visible change. So you see, your own belief system will get shattered when you hit the ground because the reality becomes very different then, or how you're thinking while sitting in Delhi. You know, so that was one of the, I don't know if it answers your question, but yeah.
We'll take one more, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. I regularly read your Outlook magazine, and I don't miss your editorials.
I will call them intros now.
So, and I appreciate the the general audience who write back to you. I mean, they are also fantastic. I mean, you should take them as for guest columns or something like that. So now my question to you is, in my age group, my friends who are settled in various parts of India and abroad also, they are saying, you know, how do we get these children out of mobile and get them into this reading habit? Because, you know, they are 90% of the time they spend on mobile. And, you know, if you lose this reading habit, then, you know, we are going to be nowhere. That's what I feel. And most of the young generation are saying, no, अरे नहीं, हम तो mobile पे ही पढ़ लेते हैं. But you know, that's always a disturbance because every now and then there is a pop-up coming. So you know, if you get a chance to visit our central library in Panjim, it's one of the best. And I read your magazine quietly there itself. Yeah. So what is your take on it? How do we get out our children?
Firstly, I think you should cut off internet only because बच्चों को इंटरनेट और फोन देने की जरूरत नहीं है. You should give them. See, what we do is like we now have started this thing in Outlook. When we had events पहले तो वो कप वप देते थे लोगों को गिफ्ट में, वो अभी भी बहुत ट्रेंड है वो कप पे कुछ छाप वाप के. Now we have started doing giving them books and like कि ठीक है, if somebody is coming to our event, we have tied up with some of the bookstores and the return gift is a book. So we are starting out with these smaller things. Also we are tying up with a lot of these bookshops for our events so that when people, like we can hold and host events in bookshops. And by the way, things are changing. You know, if you look at the worldwide data and all that, bookstores are making more profits than they have ever made, 100%, 200%. So people are actually flocking back to bookstores to buy physical copies of the book, and that's why we encourage physical copy ka subscription, because this digital pressure is even killing us and killing journalism and killing fiction writing as well, poetry for instance. This new thing of like the rupee kaur kind of poetry, you know, I mean, I mean, if you, I don't know how many have read Rao Zurita, for instance, right? I mean, that poetry, this poetry, you know, this Instagram quick, fast food kind of stuff. But once you get hooked on to that, I think there is, you will not go back. Because I still carry physical books if I take a flight, or, you know, I have a Kindle because it's easier sometimes when you're traveling, you can't carry 5 books. But, you know, it's not like that. Like a lot of people still read magazines. We have a lot of college kids who come to Outlook regularly, and you know, yeah, I know it looks very doomsday type, but I hope, yeah.
Okay. Off the top of your head, 3-4 of your favorite movies, not too many actually, on journalism and journalists.
Well, I only watch horror films, so and serial killer films. And we did issues on both. We did one on serial killers.
Let's talk about
horror
movies.
Okay. So horror, you know, I liked, I don't know how many of you have seen this Train to Busan, the zombie film, the Korean one. You know, it's a fantastic film according to me. And the Witch. There was another, and you know, The Shining, for instance, that's a great film. And The serial killers were many. I think I've exhausted Netflix now, and now I'm like thinking of subscribing to. But I do binge watching, like, and I watch really what the intelligentsia will call like crap shows, like Walking Dead. I love Walking Dead. I'm still waiting for 12th season. It never came. Or Mindhunters was great actually. So yeah, I only watch. I don't like this Harry Met Sally type stuff.
Okay. Serious question then. The journalism you and I and so many of us grew up with, it is going through some sort of a crisis. I mean, I haven't read up on it as such, but you know, you sense, and every now and then you see headlines, people being laid off and all that. But there is another kind of crisis, which is that, and most obvious in American media, but we are seeing it here in India as well, concentration in terms of media ownership, and not just newspapers, but television and radio and everything. So that if you're looking for diversity of views or diversity of anything, you know, I mean, again, the degree of interference, involvement, it's not like everyone is doing what Elon Musk is doing to, what's it called, X, right? I mean, completely involved with the US elections. But the point is, in that sense, that there seems to be, because of new technologies, because of growing concentration of wealth worldwide, there seems to be multiple crises in journalism. You know, NDTV is no longer NDTV, right? I mean, that is something so many of us had gotten so accustomed to, right? Where do you see this headed? I mean, in the end, will we all be watching, you know, one nation, one news channel kind of thing? And I mean, and without you know, subverting elections or democracy per se, right?
See, I think, you know, firstly, in India, the crisis happened right after the US crisis happened. I was there in the US at the time, and there were layoffs after layoffs and newspapers shut down, but they had a slightly different model. They have community newspapers, regional newspapers, and then they have the national newspapers. Here the focus was more on like mainstream national magazines or newspapers. So the crisis hit them because the digital came in, and they didn't know how to make money or how to survive this digital pressure. There are 10,000 stories available, how Google kind of controls this whole thing by crawling. So we don't understand this technology as well, but apparently Google crawls every, like, God knows where it's crawling, but every like 10 minutes or something Google crawls. And then there's this whole new thing called the SEO, and you have these keywords and this and that. So the focus entirely shifted from storytelling to kind of surviving, right? And that surviving never happened greatly, because a lot of the editors were not willing to change, for instance, and they had their own reasons, because they had not understood this new technology and what it would do. And this post-truth world came in, you know, like, for instance, there were multiple narratives of the same, and all kinds of things happened. So the US now has gotten its act together, and there are LA Times and all, which were doing really badly at some point in time. New York Times is making profits. So they figured out a way with, in terms of, you know, how to channelize what you are with the digital thing. What was happening over here, what I would call identity crisis or personality crisis, because a lot of us, and in fact Outlook made that mistake as well, they went to this online game, not really understanding that they were a magazine primarily. So if you start to do something that everybody, like, we can't replicate Times of India, for instance, or we can't do agency. So, you know, breaking news, for instance, and television was the biggest problem, I think, in my view. This television news, and India went a step further with these noisy panel discussions and eyeball raising kind of stuff. So all sophistication of debate and everything was lost, and people got used to this drama. Now, if a lot of stories that actually are important shouldn't have this kind of drama, actually. So that did a lot of damage. And then these new models came in with ownership, with corruption. See, the thing is, at one point in time, people used to say, na, jhole wala journalist hai. I'm not saying that you should be against money. Obviously, we all need money to survive. But you can't like think ki bhai I'll have like a bungalow here or a farmhouse there, or editors should not become CEOs for sure. Those two things should be kept very separate if you have to have a healthy and functional, and by healthy I mean ethical newsroom. So there's a lot of corruption. Journalists have become kind of deal makers. I've been a reporter and उसमें तो उतना पता नहीं चलता था, but now here we get to know how dirty it can get, right? And so how do you not do favors or do favors? Like today there was a call for some politician's daughter and who's doing some dance, and they said, why don't you cover it? And I'm like, we can't cover it. And who told you to call us? Like, no, but वो अखबार करते. I said, अखबार करते होंगे, हम नहीं करते. How can I comment on whichever newspaper? And this is just an example, but I'm just saying that it happened a couple of hours ago only. But I'm saying that, why should we cover a politician's dance? For instance, if you look at Ambani wedding, for instance, how many people just went bonkers covering it, and it was a vulgar display of whatever. So I'm just saying that there are choices that you'll have to make, and so the crisis can be overcome if you figure out a way first, how do you remain relevant, how, you don't get people who, you have to interview people well, which we are also learning now, and integrity is a very important thing according to me, and you'll survive. I think there's research that proves that magazines will stay, and that's why we have experimented a lot with the covers. We have we involved a lot of the art community, because I think if we work in silos, like, okay, the poet is writing poetry, and fiction writer is writing fiction, artist is doing his work, and journalists are supposed to be alug, I don't think that can work. And in the face of all of this coming, I think if we work together, we can do a lot of stuff. And a lot of these art covers have saved us in a way that, yeah. So, if you collaborate, and it works very well. So that's what we have learned, and we are still learning. In fact, the 2024 issue, the year opener, another 100 pages, we have a guest editor situation where we got Amar Kanwar, who had made a film called The Night of Prophecy, which basically collected poems from across India and from Dalit poets, and in conflict zones like the Northeast and Kashmir, everywhere. And he looked at poetry as evidence, and evidence of lives lived, the reality, because in terms of post-truth situation, who do you turn to for the truth, right? Not to journalists, but to the poets, right? Because the poets are compressing it, they're telling the story in whatever way. And so we did an issue, and there were two streams. One was a photo story, which ran parallel to the poetry. And this poetry we sent out all the reporters to find local poets, vernacular and everyone else, and from all over. And a lot of people made fun of us ki Outlook has gone mad, who publishes 100 pages of resistance poetry, and what does it mean? Oh, I said it's a resistance in itself to the formula-based approach of newspapers and magazines, where they still think a Modi rally might be more worth covering than this. So that was a big experiment that we did, and I'm very thankful that we did it. And nobody said anything to us in terms of our management, because newsprint is very expensive. So to print 100 pages of poetry was one of those approaches of surviving the crisis. So I think together, if you collaborate with a lot of people, you'll be able to. Somehow I have a lot of hope, I think, yeah.
Actually, I didn't want to tell you then, or maybe I did, yesterday when you said that, we had a special issue, 100 pages of poetry. I said, you must be mad. I mean,
there are a lot of people said, ki Chinki Sinha pagal ho gayi.
And I think my next question was, how did the issue do? I mean, and
Well, the issue actually did very well, and we collected a lot of poems. We collected, I think, around 183 poems, and we saved those poems. We are like old school tailors. We don't waste any kataran phataran. So we have this weekend reads online, and we keep using it and replugging it. So we use those 83 poems one by one, and some of them we used in the other issues. We still get emails saying thank you. A lot of poems. Internationally also a lot of people were quite surprised that we did it. And yeah, so that's why when you ask the first question about my week, it's also a lot of fun, because when you have this kind of freedom, then you're like, okay, let's do this, let's do that, and maybe we can do an issue on a lizard if there are good stories. It's just one of those things.
I'll go to the audience for a couple of questions before we end. But since I have sort of a captive audience, our next program, if you don't mind, Chinki, our next program is two speakers who will be talking about the Stitched Ship project, which the Indian government is sponsoring, and the ship is being built right here in Diwar, on Diwar Island. This is a reconstruction of, I don't know which century ship, 17th, Rahul, maybe you know, which century ship is being reconstructed? 10th century ship. And Sanjeev Sanyal, who is an advisor to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, member of the PM's Economic Advisory Council and very involved with the project, he'll be speaking on the subject. And we are getting through the embassy of the Indian Embassy in Oman and the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, Captain Saleh. Now, Captain Saleh captained the ship, a reconstructed ship from the 7th century or the 9th century, which was found only in 1998 by the Singaporeans. And the Omanis reconstructed that ship, and Captain Saleh sailed that ship from Oman to Singapore, I think in 2010. So he's going to be here, and that should be very interesting for anyone who's interested in, the Indian Ocean, broadly speaking, and in navies and ships and such. End of the month, which is not yet unannounced, about 26th. This is for everyone who pops pills of any kind, and almost all of us do. Many of you might remember the Ranbaxy story from about 10, 15 years ago. When Dinesh Thakur turned whistleblower, he used to work for Ranbaxy. He turned whistleblower, and he reported, fudging of data by Ranbaxy and all kinds of other irregularities. A few years later, Ranbaxy pleaded guilty in a US court, was fined about $500 million. There's a book on it by Catherine Eben, on award-winning book, published in 2019, and Dinesh Thakur and his lawyer Prashant Reddy, who is also going to be here, they wrote this book in 2022. And when I called them in, I said, look, we are going to be talking about drug regulation. So they said, well, there is somebody in Goa who's worked for a bunch of pharmaceutical companies, and Ganadhish Kamath, and we should invite him as well. So there will be three people two of them from the pharmaceutical sector, and Prashant Reddy, the lawyer. And of course, Dinesh Thakur has gone on to finance actually a lot of projects by journalists on health and the pharmaceutical sector. So please do turn up for that, because as I said, all of us pop pills. Almost all of us, surely. Two more questions from the audience, and then we'll end. A question? Chaliye. This is King Shuk. He's a professor at Goa Institute of Management. Writes a lot on labor and unemployment.
So, this how intense is this fear factor you talked about in the beginning, like these raids happening on different organizations, NewsClick or News Laundry, and also suppose NDTV getting sold out. So how intense is this? Is this over exaggerated, or is it there, or like
No,
how you deal with this?
Well, it's not an over exaggeration for sure, because now you know that UAPA and all kinds of things are there, and now that pehle hum log ko bhi, we also thought over exaggeration is there, but now that I'm there and the things come, it's different. It's actually real. The fear is very real. Because we have a lot of correspondents who do have, couple of our reporters have UAPA hanging like a sword on their neck. It's funny also how it works. So when we were in Kashmir, we were to interview, and journalists, they have to go everywhere, right? It's not like, I'll go to this side and that side, both sides, right? So we went to interview Mir Wayas. I don't know how many of you know the religious and political leader who's the Umar Farooq's son, who was under house arrest since 2019, was also the founders of Hurriyat. And I've been going to Kashmir for a long time. So Mir Wayas agreed and he said, look, I think that day they are going to release me from house arrest and I will go to the Jamia Masjid because I have to give a sermon. That's what he does. And there were no stone pelters or anything. I said, "ठीक है, चलो जाते." And then we go there, and then firstly we were stopped by all these police, and there were like this massive security situations, like आप अंदर नहीं जा सकते. तो ऐसे पर हमको तो उन्होंने ही बुलाया है. Then they were like, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm the editor of Outlook magazine," and they are also not ready to believe. They are saying jeans पहन के coffee हाथ में लेके कौन आता है, but like whatever. Meanwhile, apparently was put under house arrest back because we were supposed to interview him. And he never showed up at Jamia Masjid. And then by evening, apparently, all our photos had been circulated, you know, this IB, everyone. And so a lot of people said, don't do the issue or whatever, you know. But and how do you overcome the fear is like that. See, you can't really overcome the fear. So every time we do something, you know, we have to make a choice. Okay, fine, we did this issue, but there was another story that we couldn't do. Okay, because there were consequences involved. I mean, if because the other person would not have had that kind of consequence, but I would have had to face this kind of consequence. So you are constantly making a choice, and you are constantly also kind of taking a risk. कि ठीक है, हमने वो risk लिया because हमारे हिसाब से that time we thought the election results will save us. So that was a calculated risk, and thankfully it happened like that. But yes, there is a lot of pressure, not just in terms of prison or whatever, but also in terms of money. We've seen no advertisement. People will pull out of events at the last moment, you know. So there's all kinds of. The thing is also to not take your job too seriously or take yourself too seriously as a human being as well. So, you know, editors' lives are not like long in that sense. Abhi editor ho, kal nahi rahega. So, you know, you should learn to be, you know, normal. So that's the
something different. Like, can you have a kind of a story on informal labor or migrant workers? Because that the COVID thing, and then that time that in the middle class they came to know about that there are informal migrant workers among us. So that period, that lockdown brought those things. But after that, people have again forgotten. So can we have and also this is important because suppose we had a very kind of strong protest against the 3 agricultural new laws that came up, and then government had to withdraw that. But also 4 new labor codes are coming, but no very visible protest happening because informal workers are scattered, so there is no way you can mobilize them. But you can have a story, like how they survive on a day-to-day basis on the urban fringes. So can we have...
So you read Outlook. We have done issues after issues on migrant laborers. In fact, our freedom issue, we did this freedom to and freedom from, that, you know, negative and positive liberty, that whole concept. And we looked at bonded labor. Nobody has, in recent times, nobody has done a bonded labor story. And in fact, many years ago, I was reporting on this bonded labor. Never did the story because I left after that. But in 18 kilometers from Patna, the Labour Department had released 18 bonded laborers, and they were these bonded laborers not like कि वो पुराने ज़माने वाला system जिसमें कि दादा और परदादा ने कभी कोई कर्ज लिया था, and it continued, and these guys were, and I went to the Labour Department in Gaya, and they had like all these files saying कि this is bonded labor file, and I'm like, but the government said Narega came and bonded labor was eradicated. That was the advertisement, right? We just came out in August with this bonded labor. We in fact traveled to Gaya in Bihar, Jharkhand, India, and we looked at the changed definition of bonded labor, which in terms of like the brick kiln workers, people who have, it's a very sad story, but we have continued to, this is a male-dominated newsroom and women-dominated newsroom, because we do look at labor. Labor remains one of our primary focuses, and even like for instance gender, like women migrant laborers, unke saath kya hota hai? Because during the COVID, I was with BBC, and I was, that UP Delhi border. My friend used to stay there. In fact, it was so sad at that point in time when because we were allowed to travel as journalists, and we would sit in the buses with the migrants, and they didn't know where they were going to be taken away, and we would end up with them in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. In some center. And then I traveled to the migrant corridor in Darbhanga and all these places, and these guys, that whole chappal story, I don't know, the BBC journalists, I don't know if you followed it, they didn't have chappals. They were walking for thousands of kilometers, and the government just came and announced that aap sab gharon mein rahiye. But what about people who didn't have homes? What about people who were like rent? We all celebrated this whole approach to counter COVID in terms of Italian situation where people were like playing guitar and drinking wine at home, but they could have afforded that kind of quarantine. We couldn't have as a country or as a society, and nobody thought about the migrant laborers that time. We have seen such sad stories that people, like pregnant women, for instance, they had tied Bisleri bottles on their feet because they didn't have slippers. So a lot of people started distributing Parle-G biscuits, bananas, and slippers to migrants who were walking. Which government does this to its own people? Farmers protest, for instance. How do you dig trenches, and so we do a lot of work on laborers, migrant laborers. If you look at our issues, if you give me your email or something, I'll send it to you if you are interested in labor.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
We must have
I
taken
will
out
get
at
in
least
touch
7
with
or 8 focused on migrant laborers and labor.
Thank you.
Chaliye, so that's it for today. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Chinki.
Thank you so much. Thank you.